Good evening. Welcome to History of the Promise. This is a Bible handbook Bible study. I'm going to get that straight one way because I know I don't say it at the same time all the time. Presented by He Promise Publications. All right. If you own the ebook version or the hard copy of History of the Promise Genesis, the book of Genesis, you will see we're going into Genesis chapter 16, which also says lesson 4. These lessons are broken up. I think we originally did it so people could, really study them out weekly. I don't know if it's falling for us like that when we're doing it. But we are going into lesson 4 for those of you who have the book itself. Okay, for the rest of you, it doesn't matter as long as you have something. Let's just go ahead and hash through this, okay? So, Genesis chapter 16. Sarai and Avram make plans for an heir. Sarai and Avram make plans for an heir. So before we get started here, we all know that Abram and Sarai are of advanced age, even for advanced age for the age that the people in their times are starting to have their first children, okay? So we all already know this. So let's go into it. And this chapter is interesting. It's an interesting chapter. I'm just trying to hold this phone right. All right, so verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not given birth to any children. She had a servant, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, "See now, Adonai, or the Lord, has kept me from having children. Please go in to my servant. It may be that I will obtain children by her." Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to Abram, her husband, to be his wife. He went into Hagar, and she became pregnant. When she saw that she had become pregnant, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Sarai said to Abram, "This wrong is your fault. I gave my servant into your bosom, and when she saw that she had become pregnant, she despised me. May the Lord judge between me and you." That's a moment, ain't it? Okay. But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your maid is in your hand. Do to her whatever is good in your eyes." So Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her face. Yahweh's messenger found her. So it's the heavenly messenger. Found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain on the way to Shur. He said, "Hagar, Sarai's servant, where did you come from? Where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from the face of my mistress Sarai." Yahweh's messenger said to her, "Return to your mistress and humble yourself under her hands." Yahweh's messenger said to her, "I will greatly multiply your children, that they will become too numerous to count." Yahweh's messenger said to her, "Behold, you are with child and will bear a son. You shall call his name Yishmael, because Adonai has heard your affliction." We got some bold print here, guys, so we've got a promise. "He will be a wild donkey among men. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. He will live opposed to all of his brothers." She called the name of Adonai. I told you every once in a while when I'm reading this, I'll get hit with something I didn't see before. It happens all the time. Anyway, but I'm not called to go into it, so I'm not going to go into it. I was like, whew, well, that's deep. All right. She called the name of Adonai, who spoke to her. "You are an El," that's capital E, so you are a God, as in one God, a proper God, who sees. For she said, "Have I even stayed alive after seeing him?" So, she laid her eyes on the messenger from God, and she knows I'm still alive. after seeing them. They understand how big this is. Nowadays, ain't nothing big to nobody. Nothing means nothing to nobody nowadays. Like I said, I always bring you guys down to the river for this season anyway. I bring you down to nature for a reason. Because nature is talked about. Nature is important. I fish in these waters. There's life in these waters. But I want you to start to see the things you go past that mean nothing to you means so much more to you than you could imagine. When you start opening your eyes to little things, you'll start to see the bigger things. All right, let's see. Okay, so verse 14. Therefore, the well was called Beer Lahai Roy. And Beer Lahai Roy is defined as well of the one who lives and sees me. So this is what Hagar, an Egyptian, who is a slave in the Hebrew camp, is seeing this God that is not a natural God to her as one who lives and sees her. That's huge, okay? Hagar gave birth to a son for Avram. Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar gave birth to, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar gave birth to Ishmael for Abram. So 86. And we're getting a first child, and not by his wife. All right. So let's jump in. Oh, we got quite a few. Let's jump into the questions and remarks and stuff for Genesis chapter 16. Oh, so again, have your Bibles ready. If you have copies of History of the Promise, have that ready. Your Google open for Genesis chapter 16. Let's go and do this. Whose idea was it for Hagar to become a second wife to Abram? Whose idea was it for Hagar to become a second wife to Avram? Go ahead and write that down if you're writing your answers, or click it in your head, however you're doing. Next question. And remember, pause me. Go ahead and pause me. Lord knows I'm not going nowhere until you can get your questions straightened out. Does this remind you of something that happened in the beginning of the story? Does this remind you of something that happened in the beginning of the story? I'm going to tell y'all, personally, I'm drawing a blank right now, so I'm going to have to dig back to the beginning. I'm like, second wife. I got to dig back myself. All right. Next question. Did Abram have to agree with the plan? Oh, shoot. I got it. It's not a perfect... Oh, I got it. Lord, I got it. Okay. Did Abram have to agree with the plan? Did he have to follow through with it? Whew. It's amazing how it hit me. Next question. Who else earlier in the story, and we're only 16 chapters into this story right now, who else earlier in the story could have not agreed with a plan set before him by his wife? Who else earlier in the story could have not agreed with a plan set before him by his wife? Now, I'm going to tell you, if you all already know the question to that, the answer to that question, if it's hitting you, you can probably figure out how this is going to go. Okay. All right, here we go. Hagar gets pregnant. What begins to happen between her and her owner, Sarai? When Hagar gets pregnant, what begins to happen between her and her owner, Sarai? Next question. Who does Sarai blame for her mistreatment? Who does Sarai blame for her mistreatment? And this ties in with it. Whose fault is it really? Whose fault is it that she is getting mistreated by her pregnant slave who is impregnated by her husband. Okay? Okay, next. Abram allows Sarai to treat her slave, who is now also his wife, as she sees fit. Here we have an 86-year-old man with 2 wives, and there are now problems in his household that did not exist before. From what you have learned so far about Yahweh, do you think that this was his plan? I'm going to read this one again. Abram allows Sarai to treat her slave, who is now also his wife, as she sees fit. Here we have an 86-year-old man with 2 wives, and there are now problems in his household that did not exist before. From what you have learned so far about Yahweh, do you think that this was his plan to give Abram an heir? Pause me if you need to. All right, next question. Sarai is about 75 years old at this time. We will see the math about her age soon. Okay, that's in parentheses. And Hagar runs away from her into the desert after she is allowed to treat her harshly. So we got a 75-year-old woman. Now, I'm going to tell you, we do not believe that Hagar is that old, okay? She's probably younger, a bit. How bad do you think Sarai was treated by Hagar? Let me back up. I was reading that one way and it wasn't coming out right. Let's try it again. How bad do you think Sarai was treated by Hagar to drive her to the point that she could treat the woman she chose to be her husband's second wife to the point where she ran away? How mad, let me make this easy, how mad does a 75-year-old woman have to be that she could do somebody enough harm and mistreatment to make them just run? It's kind of deep. All right, next question, guys. Who finds Hagar and what does he tell her to do? Look back if you need to. Who finds Hagar and what does he tell her to do? Last little run and a question towards the end. Okay. What does the messenger tell Hagar about her son that is to be born? What does the messenger tell Hagar about her son that is to be born? Speaking of his character. Later in the story, you will find that a prophecy about the character of a person is sometimes a prophecy about the character of the descendants to come from him. I'm holding my tongue tight. Sometimes it's killing me. Sometimes. When you hear about the prophecy of somebody's character, what we're really being told about is the character of the people that will come from them. So with that in your mind, what does this chapter say about the character of Ishmael and potentially about the character of his descendants? All right, you guys, that is the last question. I'm going to tell you, I get excited sometimes. Those of you who have been following this with me, you know I get excited sometimes. Because what happened with me when I started working on this study, it wasn't like somebody was sitting here reading it to me like you. I had to go through, verse by verse. There was a lot of work that went with this. But things would pop up, and I'm like, what in the world? And I go research other things. I go research, like something like this, the descendants of Ishmael, just to see if it's a trip. It's a trip. But here's the thing. I'm going to throw this right back at you. I'm keep telling you, this is the history of the promise, not the fake book of some fake promise. This ain't about no fake Messiah with no long blonde hair walking around. This ain't what we doing. So sometimes if you dig back into history that you already believe, like there is a group of people, the history that you do know, the present history, will actually, as we keep going through, tie itself to the history of the Bible to show that the Bible is a book of history and that it is true. All right, I'm gonna leave it at that. Next time we'll be getting into chapter 17, and we'll be talking about the promised son still to come. So it's like dun dun dun. For those of you who know the story, we have a son that's coming, but we're about to find out that he ain't the one. He ain't the one. All right, y'all. Have a good evening, and I'll catch up with you later. Bye.